Good evening and welcome to the forum, Members Surgery Live, the stream that connects you to the rest of the union. And my name is Scott Haslam, President of the Leeds #1 Amalgamated branch of the Communication Workers Union. Thanks for joining us tonight, or even watching later, or you might even be listening to the podcast that we'll be launching soon. So this will give an extra string to our communication bow. Tonight's session, I'm joined by Carl Maden, CW Acting Assistant Secretary, and tonight we want to talk about the ABCGs, attendance, bullying, harassment, conduct and grievance policies or agreements this evening. So hi Carl, thanks for joining us. Would you like to give a bit of an introduction about yourself, mate?
Yeah, thanks Scott, and good evening everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Carl Maden. As Scott said, I'm currently the Acting Assistant Secretary of the PTCS department. We cover engineering, fleet, RMPFS engineers, and the policies, all the HR policies. So that's why we're here tonight, is for you to ask questions and hopefully get some answers.
Excellent, thanks for that, mate. So I'd be, well, yes, I would be, yeah. So I'd be most grateful if you could help us reach more people. They're starting to come online, as we've said, so do share the feed, tag your colleagues and all the normal stuff. So also please consider liking our Facebook page, the CW Leeds #1 and the Northeast Facebook page, and also our YouTube channels if you're watching on that, because we are approaching a milestone on that channel. So let's get this session into flow. So Carl, I think it'd be worth having a bit of a recap as a of an overview for the last 12 months. How has the pandemic, the dispute and everything else been affecting the department you've been covering for the last 18 months or so?
It's obviously been difficult, Scott, and not just for our department but for everyone, because during the pandemic we had the clinically extremely vulnerable who have obviously had to shield. Some people obviously during that period, it's not good being out of the workplace. For some people, their community is their workplace. That can obviously create several problems with mental health and feeling isolated. Thankfully, we were working with the company that when people were coming back to work, there was an agreed approach where everyone should have had a conversation before they came back, for the managers to understand and hopefully give some comfort to people coming back into the workplace if there was any reasonable adjustments required, what had already taken place. It's been a difficult period because obviously all the members have been key workers, and I have to say, I think our industries, the postal and the telecommunications, have been fantastic throughout this, linking communities and joining the country together. So, from me, a thanks to everyone that has been working through that. It's obviously been difficult because we've never experienced anything like this before. So there was no pre-arranged agreements in place, and sometimes decisions were being made overnight, and in certain cases you could have had any one of the 4 devolved nations making different announcements to everybody else. So yeah, it's an extremely busy period, but we were in there, we wanted to be in there protecting our members, and I think the union can be proud of what we've done throughout that period. Excellent.
So I just keep muting myself because I'm at home and we've got kids going in and out, so I don't want too much feedback coming back. Yeah, it has been a difficult period, and I do remember certainly last year there were emails galore about some of our people going on nil pay and such, and I know you were sort of the forefront of all that, and I think so. A lot of our members, which you managed to secure them assurities from the company, would really be in your debt on that, if to be fair. So the department it's a funny department in terms of how it's run, isn't it? Because you know, when you talk about David Robertson's department or Mark Bolsh, it's quite industrial based, isn't it? And they draw agreements specific to their different functions. Now, you do have a function within the department, which is the engineers side of stuff, the technical side. But broadly, the department focuses on agreements and policies. And actually, when you think about them, they do coexist, don't they? And you know, we can formulate policy from a union perspective, but then the business or the different companies that we operate in have their own policies as well. And then there's seems to be like misunderstanding about what policy is and what agreements are. So I think it'd be an interesting way to seek that clarity, Carl, if we may, to what is the actual difference between the agreements and the policies.
Okay, I'll try and explain it in as simple as I can, and the way that I sort of look at it is anything that's negotiated with the union is an agreement. So anything that we negotiate on, which will be terms and conditions, you know, anything that we put out to ballot to the members is definitely an agreement with us. However, there are certain things that either we wouldn't agree or that it is a business policy in inverted commas, and you know, sometimes we get asked to comment on them, but we don't necessarily get to agree it. So, for example, there is a policy within our agreement. It says that they will have an occupational health, within that. But what they actually negotiate and the services with occupational health will be their policy. Or, you know, they might have, so we've got an attendance agreement, but they've got a sick pay policy, which does clash with the attendance agreement. And we're talking to them about that around what comes through. Now, we influence that quite heavily, and we see that as a benefit, obviously, and you know, if they try to take that away, then obviously we would be in there and speaking to them quite harshly. But so effectively, an agreement is basically anything that we negotiate with them and agree and put out to the membership.
Yeah, excellent. So as you rightly said, there's a lot of crossovers. So then it's getting down to nitty gritty, isn't it? About and I think there's some comments actually coming through, particularly from Peter. I won't put them on screen just because I don't think they're correctly PC, so we say. So, but it kind of ties into a little bit because you were good enough to come to our AGM on Sunday, wasn't you, Carl? And one of the points that Pete has made is about managers investigating managers, in effect, which is the same sort of principle of what we're talking, and really that's a massive concern, or certainly it seems a massive concern from members around the country, isn't it, about how you know, a member can register some form of complaint, whether it's a grievance or a bullying harassment, yet then there's a manager is investigating that said manager, and the perception is they're siding with their colleagues, aren't they, rather than maybe our members. So you know what, the sentiment from Sunday, wasn't it, was about the application and how that bullying harassment particularly agreement is being deployed rather than the actual wording within it, isn't it?
Yeah, so far too often people jump to the conclusion that the agreements themselves are not fit for purpose, and that was the discussion that we were having at the AGM. And actually, the agreements themselves are great agreements, and it's the application of the agreement that is wrong. And you know, our role is to ensure the correct application of them agreements. And you'll know that during the 4 pillars dispute, we specifically pulled out attendance as one of our points of dispute, because that agreement was one that we could definitely identify that managers were not applying correctly. So we've been in talks and are still in talks around the attendance agreement and, you know, ensuring the correct application. So if we kept changing our agreements every time managers misapplied them, they'd misapply them on purpose, because the agreements would then get weaker and weaker. So, you know, one of the things that we do and is we are holding them and in talks at the moment around attendance at the moment, but we will move on to other agreements and making sure that they're applied correctly. As part of that process, we're also going through the guides that they give to managers to deal with the process and looking to beef them up, simplify them, so that there can be no misinterpretation, and therefore, you know, our reps, where there is a misapplication, our reps can then go and challenge the managers around that.
Yeah. So, I mean, particularly if you're going, hello, they're feeding back there. So, that's very off-putting. Right. So, in terms of the reviews that we're talking about there, and looking at the managerial policies that I suppose the business interpretation of the agreement is their policies and such, and working through them so there's some common ground and some common understanding. That sort of ties in nicely, doesn't it, with sort of the other aspects of it, which is the joint training that's being rolled out. So that, you know, if a rep and a manager is jointly being trained and, you know, having that discussion as regards how the application should be done, and then the manager decides to go off at a tangent, then the rep can say, well, hang on, to quote yourself, Carl, on Sunday, don't you remember when we were sat in that room and we were told X, Y, and Z, and you're doing A, B, and C? So I think it's quite important, isn't it, about this joint training and sort of reviewing those policies in conjunction with it, and it's deployed jointly.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I'm a big fan of joint training, because, you know, then there can be no misinterpretation of an agreement, and you can hold the manager to account. As you say, you was on the same course as me, that question was put, or that scenario was put, and you know, it's definitely something that we will look to be doing. So any, you know, changes that we make, obviously the members will get to verify any major changes within the agreement. However, one of the things that has to come out of this is a training package around certain aspects. A couple of, just, you know, picking up on a couple of points is, so for example, the Equality Act, and from the Equality Act, you know, rehabilitation, making sure that everything that's within the agreements are adhered to. So we'll certainly be looking to do some refresher training or joint training through that at some point going forward.
Excellent. So I'm looking at the feed, some of the comments coming through. I mean, it's funny. It's almost as if Pete was actually at the AGM on Sunday, and he's actually from Hull, so it wasn't there. But maybe people have spoken, and it's got that way out. But you know, some of the comments is saying they're neutral investigators, which is a very similar sort of sentiment, wasn't it, about maybe having some neutral people on there, I suppose, like an employment tribunal panel almost. But that obviously adds its own complications, as I'm sure you'll be able to explain again, as you did on Sunday. And then another one from Pete is no longer managers investigating like mediators. Now, there is a mediation process, isn't it, within the agreements that we've got. So I was wondering if you can cover off the reason why perhaps independent and panels and such, and what you're looking at doing broadly going forward, and also about the mediation process.
Yeah, so I mean, let's have a sort of discussion about the panel first, because generally a panel would be made up of 3 people. It would be a union representative, a manager, and an independent chair. Now, for our NAP process, our national appeals process, that is a lawyer. So it's someone that knows the law that comes through that. So a lot of the time, you know, it will tend to be the manager will go with the manager, the union rep will go with the union rep, and therefore it's down to the independent person. And even if you had a panel where the rep was sitting with the manager, just, you know, looking at the case, you are effectively then pitching rep against rep in some ways, because, you know, in certain circumstances, whether we like it or not, some actions are indefensible. And if you then turn around and cover up that, then the process doesn't work. And you could effectively be having a union rep that goes in to represent and convince a union rep, and you put in one of our own reps in the position of having to agree that someone should be dismissed or should be getting a penalty. So, you know, we are going to look at a number of things within the talks that we're having. And, you know, neutral investigators, again, that, you know, everybody says neutral or independent and what have you. And, you know, at the end of the day, what we need is the agreements that we've got with the correct application. And that is what we're looking at first and foremost. So, you know, if our agreements were looked at correctly, we have had some issues around, you know, appeals managers not doing a rehearing, but just sort of doing that. And we're challenging that as well. We're also challenging, you know, within the HR community, because even within the HR community, they tend to follow the original decision that was made. So what we're looking at is our agreements being adhered and followed in a correct process.
Excellent. So I hope that answers those points, Pete, particularly. There's a couple of interesting comments. There's one from Chris Pollock, and it'd be interesting if Unite could get that over the line for their managers, is that their bonus are linked to staff attendance rather than going off sick. But you know, that there and there. So going down the parent, so another question there. I think it's quite an important one. So why do managers have to go to HR to ask for a referral now, or certainly most of the time? I mean, my personal view is that it does refer in the agreement that that's what they should do, and certainly, you know, end of the day, depending on the nature of it, that can go your way. I know there's been examples where certainly reps where we're based in YDC, we've approached the management and said, well, why don't you consult with HR and see if they agree with us? And quite often they do come back and say, well, actually, your rep's right. So it can swing both ways. What's your view on that then, Carl?
Yeah, I'm assuming that what Chris is talking about is an occupational health referral. So back in 2018, I think it was, the business restructured, as they do or have been doing for every 12 months for quite a few years now. And effectively, what that is almost like a triage system. So previously, this is how it was explained to us and why they were doing it. So I could be off with, I don't know, gastroenteritis, and knowing that I'm going to be back in a few days. So the manager would contact me on day one, ask for my permission to get an OH review, but I'm going to be back in work in a couple of days' time. Or I could be off just recovering from an operation. And instead of just having the proper sort of contact strategy where we have a discussion of how I'm getting on, they'll want to refer me to OH. And actually, there's no way I can come back to work anyway, because I've got a 5 or 6 week recuperation period. So how it was put to us was, obviously, for every time the business were going to OH, it was costing them money. So effectively, it's not asking for permission to go to OH, because they can sort of do that, but it was to ensure that an OH opinion would support the case and that it was worth going to OH at that particular point. So it's almost a triage.
Excellent. There's a comment here from Pete. Again, I think he's the number one viewer, to be fair, is Pete tonight. Anyway, it's something that does come up quite often about timescales being a data and impact could potentially have an employment tribunal. Now, personally, it could if you just sit on your laurels, but the point is we're a tribunal, and but this is what people need to, I suppose, understand, is the time starts from that point, isn't it? And if the business is slow timing in the timescales, you still register a tribunal beforehand. It's just what the reason for registering it is because you can't exhaust internal process because they've lapsed out. But equally, isn't there? There's a trigger point in it for each stage of, I will say, the grievance process. You can escalate it up, so you can actually fast track it based on the timescales. Have I sort of summed that up right, or do you want to correct me?
No, so Will, there's a couple of points I'd like to stress and clarify. So the actual trigger point for an employment tribunal, the date, is actually from the date of dismissal, not from the date of the appeal. So actually, there is a date of dismissal that doesn't change, because once you're dismissed, that is the date. So it's at that point that you should put in for the employment tribunal. So even though you haven't had the appeal, you can still apply for a tribunal and put on the application pending appeal. Well, you know, the system now has changed somewhat in recent years, where you go for mediation with ACAS first anyway. So that, you know, and you get your employment tribunal number, and once it's registered with ACAS, that stops the clock, for the want of a better term. And you know, the timing to get it in is 3 months minus 1 day. So, you know, just because a manager is taking time setting up an appeal or giving you the response of an appeal, you know, if it's for conduct or attendance, then just apply for the employment tribunal, because once it's registered, then you're in good hands. Don't wait for the appeal decision.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose on top of that, that's to do with, I suppose, the conduct and the dismissal side of stuff. But equally, you can register a tribunal for more of a grievance. So if you know, typically,
if it was some, yeah, sorry.
No, my point was that if you know, for a grievance, it might be a cash-related problem. Now, you would expect, wouldn't you, always having the industrial relations framework, we would use our industrial clout, so to speak, fast track it up through the different processes, and we'd get that sorted. But ultimately, as we've seen recently with the average holiday pay claim, we have to register the grievances, and we have to go through ACAS, and you have to drag the heels on that, say, because like what happened last night, they was refusing to acknowledge it as a grievance as such, wasn't there?
Yeah. So if you had an issue around money being deducted unlawfully, or an Equality Act issue outside of a dismissal, then yeah, you put the grievance in, but even then you don't have to wait for the outcome of the grievance as long as it's been registered. So you know, just make sure the employment tribunal will expect you to have put a grievance in and to go through the internal policies. But yeah, that would be my advice, is do both.
Yeah, do it sort of simultaneous, which is why it's quite key, isn't it, that you use your branch to ensure that things like that are logged and things are met to times. So going down the questions or the comment section, Carl, there's one there from Saf. Are you all right to pick that one up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in talks around that, and we're hoping, in inverted commas, to get some positive news soon. We have been challenging that since people have come back from shielding, and there are a few people who have had to, who have had to go sick due to non-COVID, that where they were covered under the Equality Act. We have at this moment dealt with them on an individual basis, but we are looking and in discussions with the company at the moment around that, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get a result or some good news around that pretty soon.
Excellent.
My own view on that, Scott, and it's something that I've said from the start, is a lot of our members didn't want to shield; they had to shield, not just to save themselves or protect others. So no one should suffer a detriment through being clinically extremely vulnerable. We will take all the advice we need should we not get a resolution to that. But we're in talks at the moment, which is that's always a good thing that we're talking. We're not going to allow them to be drag it out, and we'll be looking for either hopefully a quick joint resolution to that, and hopefully, as I say, we'll be able to give some good news in the not too distant future.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to the official LTB. We've got a couple of positives there. So where's it gone? Yep. So backing you up there, the agreements are excellent, possibly the best around. I think we all agree on that, Pete. And again, it's the application, which is something you're very passionate about, Carl, and we've already covered in some depth. There's another comment in from Keith Gregory, and I suppose it ties in a little bit to what we've just been saying about employment tribunals, because that is effectively where you go once you've exhausted the grievance process. Is a bullying harassment case a similar avenue, or is it that's that dust and done? Yeah.
I mean, look, you've got appeals built into the process, which will allow you to. And one of the reasons that you can appeal is you believe that the manager hasn't looked at it properly. They've supported the original decision, for the want of a better term. So that's definitely one. And once you go through that, I mean, Keith says, can you take it outside of the company to an employment solicitor? Well, we have our own solicitors that we use, in-house. We have our own ET panelists, and the department that I'm covering at the moment has a really good close link with the employment law department. So anything that comes into us that we think needs support in, we will obviously have the discussion there and ask them to get an opinion.
So I think one of the key things that I speak about quite regularly with members, and it's part of what you touched on earlier, and it was to do with the contact strategy. So quite often people say, well, no one's actually rang me or I've texted them or whatever. So there is a contact strategy, isn't there, Carl, that is not it's written in writing, obviously, but it's not that you need to contact everyone every week. It's what's agreed between the two parties, isn't it? Now, clearly, if you're in hospital with your leg up and unconscious, then you're not going to be expected to make contact with the company. But equally, if that you're on shift patterns, and it's a bit difficult to make contact, then you agree a day, you agree a time, you make that contact. And when it gets, is it the 28 days, which is the key point, isn't it, where they try and get a face-to-face? So what sort of, have you had experienced some comments from members about these face-to-face, particularly against the background of COVID? Because pre-COVID, there was, the option really for the manager to do a home visit. But obviously, you know, you're not supposed to be sharing homes and one thing another with the government guidance. So what sort of hurdles has sort of come on to the last 12 months around the contact strategy, or what's different or what's differed, and how have we reacted to that?
Yeah, so firstly, I mean, the contact strategy, it's useful to understand what the business class as short-term absence and long-term absence. So anything up to 14 days is classed as short-term absence. And that sort of contact strategy will be, you know, a discussion should take place on day one, the first day that you're reporting absent. And then you'll agree with your manager during that conversation when you're next going to have the next conversation and an update. And generally, generally that would be, you know, if you've got a doctor's appointment in 3 days' time or 2 days' time, whenever it is, well, I'll give you a call back. Or if you want to give me a call that afternoon, I can update you on what goes on. And then from that, you'll agree the next contact date. Once you go on to long term, there's almost the expectation that it'll be a contact about once a week. So you'd still agree the time, and you'd agree the date, you know, whether it is. It doesn't have to be on the shift that you're working, because when you're off sick, you don't necessarily operate. So, you know, just because I'm on nights doesn't necessarily mean that I've got to speak to my manager on nights. I can arrange a daytime telephone call or afternoon telephone call. So within the agreement, there is, so, you know, that contact will be agreed as well. So it generally be by a phone call. And within the agreement, there are, for the want of a better term, touch points, which are face-to-face discussions, whereby to see whether or not there's anything that more that the business can do to support people coming back to work. So they're at 28 days, 12 weeks, and 22 weeks. And there's, you know, with the way that mental health absence is at the moment, there are people that are saying, actually, do you know what? We need them sort of contacts more regular. Well, you can ask for a face-to-face at any point if that's what you want. I mean, you mentioned managers coming to your home. You don't have to hold the meeting in your home. If you wanted to, you can go to your usual place of work, or you can arrange it to be a place of work that's close to where you live, and have that discussion. So I know in a lot of, you know, some people live quite away from their normal place of work. So for them, while they're off sick, to go back and forth, it is a bit of a trek. So if you've got a local delivery office or an admin unit or whatever building near you, then, you know, arrange it to be there.
Yeah, so a neutral place, isn't it? I've had that experience a few times with a couple of members. But I mean, in terms of like the home visits, it's there as an offer. You're right. It's not a must. It's when it's agreeable, isn't it? So I think we're sort of going back a little bit. You kind of touched on the attendance being a particular point that we need to sort of look at following the pathway to change and the 4 pillars and such. So Pete asks, is there any other things in the pipeline? Because some of them are as much as 5-year-olds. Well, of course, so, it's saying rumours, and we don't listen to rumours, so we'll hear it from the horse's mouth if we can.
Well, the attendance agreement is 8 years old. So, and some of the other agreements are older than that. The main discussions we're having at the moment is ensuring the proper application of them. That's our policy. As ever, when we want to go and renegotiate or have discussions, the business will always put forward proposals. We're not at the stage at this moment in time where there are any major changes. However, that's not to say that there won't be. And we, as I say, at the moment, we're focusing on attendance because that was the one main issue that was highlighted within the dispute, but we will be moving on to the other agreements around grievance and B&H. You know, the one thing that we will be looking at, and we've got a lot of outstanding conference policy and things like that we want to look at. So we will always look to try and achieve that. But you know, at this moment in time, we are just discussing the correct application, which, you know, does include, we're looking at the guides that they provide and see whether they're fit for purpose. Can we update them, simplify them, and really look at what, you know, ensuring that there can be no misapplication of the agreement. You know, anyone can make a mistake. And if you make a mistake and then obviously someone speaks to you about that mistake, it's a mistake and you should correct yourself. If that carries on though, then, you know, that's not, in my view, that is not a mistake. Then that's a misapplication of the procedure. And we're talking to the company around ensuring that that, you know, that is not allowed to continue going forward.
Excellent. I mean, there's that once is a mistake, twice is a coincidence, isn't it? And then 3 times it's taking a Michael, I think. But yeah, there's a couple of things, some good advice that you've been giving so far today, Carl. So good pat on the back from Chris. A quick query. I mean, I think this is more of a Royal Mail policy, isn't it, rather than a Royal Mail CW agreement, but about the shift payments, do they fall off after eight weeks? I mean, unfortunately, I've never been on sick.
No, that's an agreement. It's part of the way forward agreement. Yeah.
Right.
So previously, what used to happen is you never used to get your allowances when you were off. You only got your basic pay. So as part of the way forward agreement, it was agreed that if you're off for 8 weeks continuous, you'll get your allowances paid within that. So yeah, that's part of the way forward.
So that's what, 20 years ago, is it? 20-year agreement.
21 years ago, yeah.
Blimey. Making me feel old. I don't know about you, mate. So another question about shielding, and it's with the annual leave. So basically, if they're pre-booked annual leave and they're shielding, does that's gone, or is it the first few weeks they have to use for part of shielding? What's exactly the process?
So people who are shielded will obviously be in the clinically extremely vulnerable category, and we're having a discussion around that as well. There's a number of things that, since we haven't come through the pandemic, but whilst things have, the people have stopped shielding and had to come back to work, there's a few anomalies that we are discussing. So there's 2 sort of types of leave, if you like. One is the leave that you get from the company, which obviously, depending on how many years you've been here, the company are saying that, you know, during the pandemic, the law stipulated they only had to pay SSP. We got them to commit to full pay throughout that period. And they are then saying that from that period, that year, that the annual leave, due to everything that has gone on, that they will be taking, anybody in the CV category will not be able to carry annual leave into the new year. We do have the working time directive, which does stipulate that for, you know, for 4 weeks of your leave, your employer can choose when you take it. However, there is another category where people who are in the CV have also purchased leave. So they've bought the leave and topped up. And, you know, the question there is, well, even if you can, under the working time directive, if someone's bought leave but not been allowed to take it, why should that be taken? Why should that be taken away? And we're also in discussion around that. You're on mute, Scott. You're on mute, Scott.
Technical. See, you're showing me up now, Carl. Yeah, so it's not a clear-cut question, really, is it? When you start adding all the different possible angles on that, really. So, in terms of if we sort of cut back to a broader sort of timeline, so what are key? Yeah, with the grievance, that were it. So we've got a grievance process, which is, well, rather there's a grievance procedure that every company needs to have under ACAS guidelines. We've negotiated our enhanced, better for our members grievance process. Well, then we've got the industrial relations framework, which is that under your department, or is it just across the postal department?
It comes across the postal department, so the IR framework would effectively come under the Deputy General Secretary, Terry Pullinger, but every department will have, inquiries.
Own interpretation. Yeah. So on that basis, how would you best describe? Because there's ways of actually deploying the IR framework for the benefit of our members, and there's also a way we can utilise the individual grievance process for individual members. And I was wondering if you can sort of explain which one you would expect our reps to be utilising for the benefit of our members, because they can cross depending on the nature of disagreement or the issue of grievance.
Yeah. So, I mean, if there's something for an individual member or a small number of members, the rep can obviously make representation to try to resolve that. In them cases, because generally you could have a general issue, but not everyone is the same, I would say for each member to put in their own grievance. So, sometimes people go, I'm going to put a group grievance in, or I'm going to do that. The problem with a group grievance is you might have slight differences amongst different people, and the business could make a decision on one, not taking into account some of the other points. And therefore, you've put it in as a group, the business will make a decision on the group. If it is quite for a general issue, terms and conditions issue, then the rep does have the opportunity to use the IR framework and, around that. So if it's an ongoing terms and conditions issue, definitely use the IR framework all the way through. You can exhaust that. If that doesn't get resolved, then, we then have to make a decision of how important that issue is to us, where, we'd always try and intervene at national level. But if it does mean that much to the unit, then branches can apply for industrial action, and we would then obviously facilitate that within the department as well, because most of that comes under our department.
So, I mean, particularly with the grievance, what would you say are the key enhancements that we've got for our grievance process compared to the ACAS standards? I know the three-stage process is an obvious standout, but what would you say are the key ones?
So again, if it was applied properly, is the automatic escalation on a time scale. So what used to happen, someone would put a grievance in, it'd sit in the bottom of a manager's drawer, and grievances, believe it or not, grievances never used to be registered. So not until they got to stage 3. So, we've now got it that even from day one, once you've had an informal chat or you say, no, I can't resolve this informally, it's recorded at all levels. We get the stats on a quarterly basis around that. Clearly, the escalation process. So, a manager can't hide. Now, I'm aware that at the moment, some of the timescales on grievances are going way beyond what they should be. even with the escalation process. And we are going to be picking that up as part of the talks on policy.
So, I mean, my understanding, particularly from the Rommel Group side of stuff, is that grievances are registered on their IT system called PSP. So, I'm just plugging in the computer and I forgot to plug it in. I don't want it go cutting off, do we? So, yeah, so they register it on PSP, and they're supposed to get these prompts as well, aren't they? So, I mean, I know that reps can't actually access PSP to see where these cases are. So, I mean, do you think that's something that could happen where, you know, if a member registered grievance and requested Rep Carl to represent them, that they could access that PSP file, if you want to verify, or do you think that's going to be more of a GDPR thing, or they'll certainly hide behind GDPR on that?
Yeah, I mean, giving the rep access potentially has GDPR issues, but there's nothing wrong with the member that's put the grievance in asking for an update. So I just want to clarify, the first discussion around a grievance, you can agree to informal resolution, and if it's agreed by informal resolution, then that doesn't get registered. It's only when you say no, we can't deal with it informally. So when you go into the formal process, so I don't want people thinking that the second that they make a complaint or they have a discussion, it's automatically on there. If it's resolved informally, it won't be. But we get all the stats that go formal on 1, 2, and 3. Oh, sorry, Chris has just asked what is
GDPR. Yeah, I just seen that.
Yeah, it's General Data Protection Regulations. So you can't share information that is personal to another individual. So I couldn't send out an email with a list of people's names and addresses and pay number on. You know, you have to have permission from the individual to share that. So,
I mean, it's interesting about GDPR in whole, because there's the access request, isn't there? Access for information request. So you could actually put a request into an organization about anything that they hold on you, and you've a right to do that under that bit of legislation, haven't you? And that's a bit of a minefield, because to search through everything to find your name, your picture, or whatever, can be a nightmare, depending on the nature of the company or the organization, and what have you. And I suppose that I don't know if we should be discussing that, because there might be some people be getting upset about that, you know, the work that may be given. Appreciation there from Chris. Thank you very much. Cass having some predictive task issues. That's not a problem. Thank you for that, AJ. And so yesterday you were on a Zoom call, didn't you? Piggyback from a previous session you did on disability rights and acts, and quite frankly, Disability and Equality Act is a key area of attendance and what leads on to grievance and broader things which you cover within your department. So what sort of questions were coming up in yesterday's session, Carl?
Yeah, so it was done in conjunction with the Equality Department at headquarters. We did a session previously, and you know, there were a load of questions. People were still saying that you know, they had questions they wanted to ask, and we had run over time the first time, and so we set up the other session, and that just coincidentally was last night, which is that obviously before this one. So people were asking questions around how, you know, how does something get recognized under the Equality Act. There was a lot of questions about people's rights with regards to rehabilitation or short-term modification within Royal Mail, so, you know, or reasonable adjustments around that, and, you know, depending on the time and what we've got left, I'm happy to go into some of that and the differences between the two if you want.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're 50 minutes into the stream, so I mean, if people are wanting specific questions around disability, asking them, pop them in the comments, and then we can make sure we cover those off in the next quarter of an hour or so. So, I mean, particularly we've talked about occupational health, haven't we? And I suppose when we're talking about reasonable adjustments, that's where the two sometimes connect, don't they? Where you speak to your doctor, they may make some adjustments that you needed to get you back into the workplace, and effectively, an occupational health referral should back that up and can even offer some sort of rehabilitation plan. But even that isn't set in writing, is it? That's still reviewable. I always make sure that when we deal with members coming back off particularly long-term sick, we have a rehab plan that is drawn up as a base, but then I always stipulate to review it every week, because you may not accelerate, you may not hit those targets after a week or 2 weeks, so you may need to slow it down, but equally you may accelerate because of the type of work you're doing. You're just speeding up. Do you find that Carl?
Yeah, so within our agreement, and we've put out a couple of LTBs on this as well, because what we were finding and what we have been finding leading up to the dispute that we had is that, particularly in delivery offices, that unless you could do a full range of duties, there was a reluctance to give you a rehabilitation or a short-term modification. So I do want to differentiate between the two. So you could have been off long-term sick, recovering from an illness or an injury, and all you require is a short-term modification just to help you get back to full strength or full health. And, you're absolutely right, Scott. What people should do is sit down with their manager, take your rep along if you want your rep within there. I was always say, have your rep. And there should be a discussion around what you can do, not what you can't. So forget what it is that you can't. What is it that you can do to build a rehab plan on? Now, that might be shorter hours. It might be doing different workload around it, or not doing specific tasks within a duty. And you should then agree with, the manager should always seek occupational health advice. And you should then have a plan around what is going on, what you're going to do for that period of time. And there should be a weekly review. And that review should really cover off, one, how you're feeling, but is there any part of the rehabilitation plan that's not working for you? And if it is, change it at that point. Don't let it exhaust going forward and then go, well, 3 weeks ago, this wasn't working for me. Also, there's been this sort of unwritten rule amongst managers that they were treating rehabilitation plans as a pass-fail after 4 weeks. Now, whilst our agreement does say it will normally be for 4 weeks, it also says it can be extended where appropriate. So if you're not quite back to full health after 4 weeks, what was farcical was managers were then saying to members, you failed your rehab, you've got to go back off sick, even though they've been at work for 4 weeks doing meaningful work. So we've put a stop to that. But then there's also the reasonable adjustment. So the reasonable adjustment is under the Equality Act, where someone might have a disability or an illness that's covered, and that is more a long-term adjustment to your duty. So that all of that should be discussed in a similar way. Obviously, you wouldn't review that every week, but you might review it every 3 months or 6 months going forward, and making sure that is done. So yeah, that's sort of the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, Kath's got a point there. I mean, it's something I always use as sort of like a backup, really, almost like a wild card. So if you have a bit of a dispute between the member and what the member is saying they can do, and then what the manager is accepting as, then I would say get a fit note to say that the doctor is saying you are fit to return to work on X, Y, and Z. And then that is a doctor saying that, and therefore they have to take that because that's the professional opinion, isn't it?
Yeah. So first of all, when I said earlier on, there's a discussion between you and your manager and what you can do, that's what the discussion should be. Your manager is not medically qualified to test whether or not you can do a particular task. And if there is a dispute, then firstly, they should go to occupational health and check that out. But secondly, it is a good idea to get your GP. However, you need to be careful, because some GPs, when you go to them and ask them to write anything, whether that be a letter, they tend to want to charge you. So even sometimes for a rehab plan. So make sure before you ask them to do it that you're not going to be charged £60 or whatever for it, because we can do that internally without you incurring that cost.
Good advice there, Carl. So there's a couple of equality. So we're talking about attendance and equality matters. So a couple of comments here. Quite often, someone will be off for a particular ailment or an issue. Sometimes when you look at their review or absence, you'll notice some form of a pattern. And sometimes when you have that conversation, which is why it's important to have that pre-meet with your member before going into any form of meeting, you get that understanding of that individual. And actually, sometimes on the informal discussions or what should happen, that's what the management should be bringing out of the individual, really. But quite often and this is the thing what AJ is saying, quite often when you're speaking to members, that's when it comes to fruition, that actually you've got an ailment there, which is a characteristic protected under the Act. And that's where then you then have to go in and argue the point that actually this is covered under the Act for, look at the legislation, how it's written, and then you illustrate it. Now, quite often the manager may say, well, I don't believe you. So how can that interpretation from a rep interpreting the member's situation and applying the Equality Act, and the manager saying we disagree with it, how can you get that conflict established?
So two things that I would do in that situation is, firstly, ask the manager what qualifications they've got to make that judgment. And when they tell you, which will be 99.9999% that they haven't got them, to write to occupational health and get their opinion, because that's why we employ, occupational health. Secondly, the general sort of rule of thumb of whether you are covered by the Equality Act is that you've got a disability, an illness, an impairment that that doesn't allow you to do your day-to-day, run your day-to-day life, that has lasted for 12 months or more, or is likely to last for 12 months or more. So, if someone's got, as you say, you're looking at someone's attendance record and there's a string of absences, then our rep, and when AJ says members, they don't realise they're covered under the Equality Act, well, that's where we come into our own as a union, as representatives out in the field. So yeah, we can always ask at any point, our members, our reps can ask management to get an occupational health opinion as to whether they believe a particular ailment, impairment, disability or illness is covered under the Equality Act. So we don't have to guess.
Absolutely. So there's a comment which sort of adds on to that. So if someone has a disability, an illness, and then they're up for a review, and that absence is the reason why they're before that absence review point, Jane's asking, in that situation, would and you're actually dealing with it now, maybe it's blood pressure, and you're on blood pressure tablets now, and that's now being addressed. But now you're up for an AR, could that be issued?
So whether you're dealing with it or whether you're not, because sometimes you need to have an experiment with medication, and drugs are the best for you. So sometimes you can't always keep it under control. Any absence that is covered under the Equality Act should be discounted, should normally be discounted. So the answer to that is no, but it's not just, it's not just the last absence that's triggered it. You could have, for example, the first 2 absences of 4 of attendance review 1 that are covered under the Equality Act. So if you then discount the first 2 absences and it's not 14 days, you shouldn't even be in the attendance review 1, because them absences should be discounted. The manager can have a chat with you and have a discussion with you to see how you're going. But then there's also the informal reviews that we've got within our agreement that they're not being used. So when we're talking about correct application of our agreement, particularly in attendance, the informal reviews should be used to tease them out. The return to work discussion should be used to have all of that. There's plenty of touch points where there can be a discussion should the agreement be applied properly in order for them discussions to take place.
Excellent. There's a final comment on the comments list from Des, and I think it's a bit of a naughty point, and if that's actually accurate, I think we should be flagging this up. I would suggest, Carl, wouldn't you? So staff have been instructed to take annual leave as part of the rehab. Now, my understanding is annual leave. You book annual leave, based on your agreed process for allocation. And I suppose if it so happens that your annual leave falls within your rehabilitation process, then that's fair point. But in terms of being instructed, as in you would need to take it now, I thought that was appropriate. What's your view there, Carl?
Right. So it's certainly not appropriate for annual leave to be taken as part of your rehabilitation, and we should be jumping all over that. So, if I've got a week off and I've booked a week off in the middle of a rehabilitation plan, then obviously I'll take my annual leave. But that week also shouldn't count as a week of my rehabilitation plan. So if I've got, for example, a week at 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, and 8 hours, but I've got a week of annual leave in the middle of that, and I've gone off after my week of 6 hours, I should come back on a week of 7 hours, not 8. So, and that should be discussed before I go off on leave.
Excellent. Strong words there. So Simon, I think it's quite an easy answer. Is epilepsy on the list of characteristics protected on the Act? And I think that's a fair foregone conclusion. Yeah,
well, it's not necessarily. It's not the fact of whether you've got something, it's how it affects your daily life and how long you've had it and going through. So, that there's a number of different things that are automatic, but other things are. So some people could have an ailment or impairment or an illness, but it doesn't affect their daily life. So they'd still be covered under the Act, but they wouldn't need to do it. So, you definitely can make a case for epilepsy.
Excellent. So a bit of appreciation from Des for your answer. So thanks for that, Des. He has put another comment, and I think it's worthy of a point. But the so-called line in the sand letters and on equality absences. I'd like some comments on that.
Yeah. So I've just covered off if there's anything specific about Equality Act absences, but I've just covered off the fact that they shouldn't be counted. So the line in the sand letters. So the company, and we haven't agreed this, but the company, should someone have an impairment, a disability, or an illness, and be having and they're covered under the Equality Act, there comes a time sometimes, and in my opinion, sometimes too early, which is another thing that we're challenging, where a manager might issue what they call a line in the sand letter. Now, they like to make it sound nice and call it a notification letter. But effectively, what that letter does is it will say that for your particular illness, disability, whatever it is that you're taking absence with, we may not discount it going forward. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean to say that they can discount it, because if we think it's not right, then you could put a grievance in and take that to an employment tribunal. But that is what the business use a line in the sand letter for. So, you know, we were in discussion at one point about agreeing a line in the sand letter some years ago. And what we wanted was, if we agreed a line in the sand letter and someone then had to leave the business, that they would be managed out through the ill health retirement procedure, or the leaving business through ill health procedure, rather than simply through the attendance procedure. The business wouldn't agree to that, so that is why there's still the little bit of conflict around the line in the sand letters.
Excellent. Well, I've got to admit, I think we've covered masses of information, some stuff that I didn't realise myself, to be fair. So thank you for that, Carl. If people have any major issues, then, you know, going forward, then they can, of course, contact the department through the correct channels, through the rep and the branch particularly, so we make sure we're keeping the rules. But, you know, would you like to offer any sort of thoughts about today's session, anything you've taken from it, and we can sort of wrap it up?
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to thank everyone for you know, coming to the session, and particularly those that have put comments and questions. I'm always happy to you know, to do these sort of sessions, and sometimes we get asked to do sessions with you know, do a part of an agenda at a committee on a particular aspect. So you know, the department is there. We're always happy to give reps advice. What we do ask, though, is that, you know, if you're dealing with a member that's got an issue, get the rep to contact the department. Try your HR business partner first. If you don't get any help there, then we're always happy to give advice. But it can get pretty awkward, and we do get a lot of members that ring headquarters directly. And whilst we're happy to give advice, just general advice about that, sometimes it can be a complaint, or that someone, and then they go, well, I don't want you to go back through the branch. And what we say is, well, no, we will go back to the branch. Should there be a complaint, we're not going to deal with a complaint from headquarters level and bypass the branch just because of what you've done. Because one, it could be the member wants a different answer from headquarters, but also, you know, it could be that they haven't gone to the branch in the first place. So we'd much prefer reps contact us to get the advice rather than directing members to us. But we're there, you know, to support reps, branches, and members. But you know, so yeah, we're more than happy to provide support and advice where appropriate.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for taking your time out, Carl, to join us and do this session. I'm hopeful that we can do something similar in the future. And then until next time, I'll just put that one on. Same time next week. Well, maybe not next week. I'm on annual leave, so we are suspended for at least a week. But we do have another session on the 10th of June. So I will tip you off for that one. That's Bobby Referral and Mick Kavanagh, who will be covering off some RMPFS cleaners and the CSP stuff, and some delivery based stuff. So that'll be an interesting session. So tune in on the 10th for that one. But until next time, thanks for watching. Remember, unity is strength. See you next time.
Bye.